First off, you can see I'm not your typical California guy. In my family, we hunt, we fish, and we don't hug trees. And we don't drive electric cars. I'm the devil because I drive a Duramax diesel. So I pass over and try to run off every Tesla off the road I can. And I saw somebody was driving one here today. I'm Greg Creson. I've been in the business for about 18 years. And when I started our company, we own a gypsum mine in Nevada, and we bring gypsum in by rail cars in different locations throughout California. And I felt our company was nothing more than an order taker. You want to play 9 holes, you want to play 18, or you just want a cart? And that's what I felt like we were doing. We weren't doing any services to anyone. And as time went on, I would have a grower call me and say, I got a 100-acre block, send me a ton to acre. That was an easy order to take, done. Next year, that same grower would call me and said, hey, send me 2 tons. I said, for the same acreage? Yep. Okay, that's easy. Next year, he called me I said, 3. What's going on? He said, I don't know. He said, apparently your guy's gyp isn't any good anymore. I'm like, okay, so something's going on here. What is the common denominator? Because we started seeing this happening over and over. So for me, I was absolutely blessed when I got into this business. And I met a gentleman who was in his 70s, and he wrapped his arm around me, and we went to work, and I could wallpaper the inside of this building with all the notes that we wrote on water quality and soil quality and the science. And he introduced me to Dr. Albrecht, and I started following Dr. Albrecht's theory and really put it into play in California. And I was looking for people and knocking on people's doors 13 years ago to talk to them about water, because in their opinion, water was wet. Water broke the fertilizer down, it went into the plants, and we were all good. Not quite that simple. This is where I live in California, right? And we call the heart of it. We feed the world, and we grow every variety of crop that we have. Today, I don't know if you guys got any snacks, but when you got the pistachios, those are one of my customers. I stopped in your grocery store last night, went through the produce section. I can just pick out customer after customer. So it's cool to have your hands on feeding the world. Love it. Okay, I hate this guy. Don't let him become your president because he's a crook. By the way, that's Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. I'm not this guy. I never went there. I respect that and believe in that. And I bleed that. So I'm not your typical California guy. This was a gentleman that took me under his wing, and I am blessed. And you see any slides, you'll see credit with his name on it. Neil Jilton, a fantastic gentleman. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I'm not going to read every portion of the slide, so you might have to read along before I jump to the next slide. So let me ask you guys a question before I show that. What is the biggest implement you put into your soil now? As a fertilizer, what is the biggest thing you put in as a fertilizer into the soil? No, we don't put anything in? Okay, how many pounds in a season? Couple hundred? Couple hundred, okay. When we look at the overall picture of NPK and the gentleman that was speaking earlier, I'm going to take him on tour with me because, boy, he hit the bullet points. So in a soil profile, calcium needs to be 65% of, that's just generic. Whatever your CEC is determines that amount, and that is the hub and side of the wheel, and the spokes go out from there. Your base saturations, your calcium, your magnesium, your sodium, and your potassium, those 4 have to be in a line before you start worrying about zinc. Out of just calcium, magnesium, 80% of your soil structure is those 2 elements. And we worry about nitrogen as 2% of the picture. But we're not worried about the 80% of the picture. We're worried about the 2% of the picture. Let's think about, is water really that big of a deal? Here's the numbers. Water weighs 8.34 pounds per gallon. That's approximately 326 gallons per acre foot. You guys measure stuff a little bit different than we do. We need to do 4 acres of water on a crop That's 27 each. So each acre foot is 2,700 pounds. Do you think water has an impact on your fertility program? It's the heaviest application of anything that we do, and whatever is in that water, whatever your water is, your soil becomes. If you don't pay attention to water and you just think it's wet, you're in trouble, because it is going to be the thief on your farm that's going to take your profit and take your crop with it. If you have poor quality water and low yielding crops, you better be looking at your irrigation water. Nutrients are available to your crops only when they are dissolved in the soil solution. Ideal irrigation and pH of less than 7. I've gotten so many reports from Kurt and Travis and asking me to break this stuff down. And I'm telling you, so if you guys if you happen to look at a soil report and you look at a pH, what pH is acceptable to you? 7, not bad. But here's what happens. 6.5 is the perfect zone because you have all 17 nutrients that are available to that plant at 6.5. And here's what starts to happen that guys don't realize and they don't understand is at 7.2, we start to have a chemical reaction. At 7.2, it starts to go from a sulfate form, which is available to the plant, to 7.8, it is no longer, it's all in a carbonate form. Every step is 12% that I'm losing. When I hit 7.8, throw all the money at it you want, and you're not going to get it into the plant. pH is only a symptom. It's telling you that something's wrong underneath the hood of the car. It's no different than you get a dummy light that goes off in the dash and it's blinking at you and you say, should I drive it home? Can I make it home? Or should I pull over and pop the hood and take a look? That's exactly what the pH, when you're seeing that pH too high, that's exactly what you're doing is you're looking for what is the broken belt, what is the fan, what is the water pump, what's gone on in my farm that I need to take a look at it, because that's exactly what's going on. Anything that interferes with the ability of irrigation water to infiltrate the soil profile or restrict plant uptake will limit nutrient availability. I'll show you guys here in a bit of exactly what I'm talking about. The last sentence there is exactly what the gentleman said earlier, is what your water is, your soil becomes. So if you're not paying attention that what your water pH is, trust me, it's coming to your soil near you because they're going to mirror each other. It's the biggest application of fertilizer that you put on the ground. Water can only hold so much before it starts to let stuff fall out of it. It'll only hold 26 milliequivalents of everything. And one of the things that he said earlier is something that I learned early on when we started looking at adjusting water, is that guys were doing foliar sprays, they were doing different adds to their different blends that they were doing in tank mixes, and they're having to put in buffers in there because their pH is too high in the water and the stuff that they're putting inside the water to do the sprays are separating. If you have 6.5 water, dump your stuff in there and go. You don't have to use a buffer because it's already there willing to accept whatever you're dumping in there. But if you have, and I know the word carbonate, I'm already laughing because I've heard it so many times today. You guys are probably sick of hearing about it. But you're going to understand it hopefully better by the time we get done and what it actually means. But if you have, let's say you have 100 parts per million of bicarbonate in the soil, and let's break that down. If you have parts per million in soil, you guys don't farm that way, right? What's a part per million mean to me? But if I take that times 2, that tells me how many pounds per acre I have. We farm that way. We understand that. In soil, in water, that number is 2.72. So 1 part per million can add up pretty quick. And if you have high bicarbonate water and you're trying to dump something in and it's kicking it out, you probably have a problem. I just went through that, 2.7.2. I'm going to blow through this because I want to get down to some realistic results that you guys will be able to see what I'm talking about, why it's important. Each pound of bicarbonate will tie up 1 pound of calcium. Starting at 7.8, that magic number that I just talked about, will tie up 2 pounds of calcium. Want to know where your calcium's going and what's going on? That's the thief that's coming along in the night. Know what you're doing in your soil. Water that is too pure, such as snowmelt, rainwater, is almost taking something with it. That was the case this past year in California. We haven't seen rain like we got this last year in forever. California was absolutely on the edge of bankruptcy with every farmer, and they didn't even know it. Guys are coming to me, my phone's ringing off the hook, and they're trying to figure out, hey, what's going on in my soil? It's not your soil, it's your water. Because what your water is now your soil has become over time. It has a vast effect on what's going on. And so this last year, we had finally got some snowmelt water. And snowmelt water does one of two things. It either leaves something behind, bicarbonates, high sodiums, or it strips stuff out. If the water EC is too low, the first thing it's grabbing is calcium, magnesium, and it's pulling that out of the soil. So typically, I'm working with growers to try to get the salts, the calcium balanced. This year, I'm worried about I didn't have to worry about sodium because it was getting stripped out with the calcium and the magnesium. The ECs got so low, it acted just like solvent on grease. It's taken that out. But when we get into it, I'm going to show you some EC numbers that you need to pay attention to. Pure water has an EC less of 50 decisiemens. Doesn't sound like much, but that number, anything below that 50, just consider it a solvent. And your EC, if it's above 1.2, I know it'll say something different on the slide, but I'm a 1.2 guy, because that gives me a little bit of buffer. It'll say 1.5, but at 1.2, I start to get nervous. Prolonged use can strip cations and salts from the soil, resulting in low nutrients. It is necessary to increase dissolved calcium in pure water by 1 to 4 milliequivalents, and we'll talk about that. Gypsum injection is a practical way of preventing problems that are created by pure irrigation water and also by sodium and high chloride water. They've said, I'm going to skip through this because I'm going to get into this. Bicarbonate and carbonate reacts with calcium and magnesium to precipitate insoluble lime. Applied amendments become less effective as they are changed into insoluble forms. So when you start to see things going on and you're like, hey, I'm not understanding why this doesn't seem to work anymore, the gentleman that was sitting here was like the poster child of exactly what I'm talking about. This doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't repair itself overnight. It takes some work, it takes some effort to get it right. Acidification of irrigation water is a preferred method of treatment. Allows calcium and magnesium to remain available and displace sodium from the CE sites. Soil amendments remain effective instead of being precipitated into insoluble. Let me give you this is probably the goofiest test that you ever did, and it was your first experiment you did as a kid. Anybody have an idea what baking soda is? Calcium carbonate. It's that stuff that we're talking about, the bicarbonate. It's exactly what we don't want. If you have an emitter, you have a pivot, and you start seeing white stuff showing up on there, and it starts blocking stuff, and you could chip it off, that's calcium bicarbonate. So what's the pH of vinegar? I'm going to call this sulfuric acid, enferic acid, phosphoric acid. It's 2.3 on the acid scale. Sulfuric is a -2, so it's that much more powerful. But this is exactly what happens when you inject this acid into your system. It's exactly what happens, and it makes sense. When you do that, you get it to gas off. So what was bad in the bicarbonate gets burned off, and you'll see that disappear from your pivots. You'll see it disappear from your emitters. And when this is all done bubbling, the calcium, the good calcium, will be what's left behind. That's the simplest way that I can explain to you what's going on when you guys acidify water. And acidifying water, there's a lot of there's options for that. Actually, Kurt's been talking about that product right there. I can't wait to get home and test it and play with it myself. But so you have infuric acid, which means it's mixed, it's sulfuric and urea mixed together. So if you have a low N number, why don't we use acid to burn the bicarbonate off and use the infuric to do that? If I use phosphoric acid, it's got phosphorus in it, burning off the bicarbonate, and I get the phosphoric benefit out of that. If I went to a sulfur burner, the sulfur burner does exactly the same thing. When the acid comes out of a sulfur burner, it's at 2.5. Every one of them does exactly that. There's the good calcium left in the bottom. Now that's going back into my field, and I'm using that. Do I always have to worry about the water? I could go out in the field, and I can apply sulfur to keep my pH adjusted in the field, and I'll apply that in fall, pray for rain. And by the way, does anybody use elemental sulfur in the room to adjust that soil? Okay. Elemental sulfur is 99% purity, but you'd be lucky if you get 20% of that to work for you in a year. I can throw it on, and in 5 years, I can go out with a shovel and dig it up, and there's that popcorn still sitting there. Unless you have really good biology to help break that down, that's going to continue to sit there. There are other elements. We use a Tiger 90 is expensive, but Tiger 90 has a 10% bentonite binding on it. It gets wet, it dissolves, it goes to work for you immediately. We also use some soluble sulfur that we get out of the petroleum industry out there. It's 70%. All I'm doing is bumping the number up to get the 100% that I actually need. And once it gets wet, it goes to work for me immediately. So popcorn sulfur is the cheapest, but also know you're only getting 20% benefit out of that sulfur. And if I'm sitting at 8 pH, how long can I afford to wait for that to react for me? Last part of that is I can do all that in the fall, and I can make that all work. And then for you guys, you're blessed with the rainfall that we don't get, and it's working. And then we actually turn on the irrigation. And as soon as we turn the irrigation on, everything that we corrected just went right backwards. Because what your water is, your soil becomes. And if I'm dumping bad bicarbonate, high sodium water on that, I'm defeating the purpose of everything that I did in the fall. A water that has a pH above 7.2 is usually associated with high bicarbonate calcium and has been converted from calcium sulfate to calcium carbonate. This happens in the soil at a level above 180 parts per million. So bicarbonate, it's plugged emitters, blossom end rot, tip burn, brown pitter, pit of apples. These are all symptoms of bad water. And a lot of times it cracks me up. If I got high sodium water, I get a call and the guy wants me to come out and look at it. And he's been told that it was low nitrogen because things are starting to turn yellow. Not nitrogen. I got a swimming pool with moss growing in it right below that same vine because I can't get water to penetrate. And the PCA is telling the gentleman that he needs to add nitrogen. Like the seed guy that he talked about earlier, that guy gets to sell nitrogen on your mistake, on your behalf, because that's what you're believing. This is an almond tree that has a fan jet, has emitters out in California that it's spraying. And where you see the color difference, that's high bicarbonate water hitting that tree. And you can see it works better than Roundup. There's no grass underneath that tree because the high bicarbonate water is blocking anything from happening. Neutralizing bicarbonate and carbonates with acid also often reduces them by half or more. Treatments include, we've gone over infuric. When you neutralize harmful calcium bicarbonate with an acid and convert it to a beneficial, just saw exactly what happens when you acidify that. You take something that's bad, you get the calcium back. This is a picture of water. The top one up here is water will take the path of least resistance. In that, and you think about that, only 30% of applied irrigation water reaches a distribution root zone. What do you think happens to the other 70? it either evaporates, and one of the things I've seen here is you guys have high magnesium waters. High magnesium, if I want to tighten up the soil and make it run sideways, I get the cation exchange out of balance and I add magnesium, and I'll see that water go sideways. It won't go down, it'll go sideways. So what we've done here is that's an acidified water using a wetting agent. And what it does is it makes that water go down in layers. In fact, this gentleman has a demonstration. I know it's not a wetting agent, but it has surfactant in it. And you can see that display back here in the back where he has water on a petri dish with a dill sitting in it and the water's not moving. He has the same thing set up with that applied, and the water was going up as well as down. Surfactants work, but they're also, he's not going to like me, they're a Band-Aid to the real problem. But our problem out there is I've got growers that got to shake almonds and walnuts and get them on the ground. Their trees are starving for water and they're wilting, and you can see it. And they know the trees are stressing out, but I have got to get water in there to get relief. But if I turn on the water, I haven't done anything all season. My soil is as hard as this floor, and I cannot get water to penetrate that deck, and I've got to shake walnuts onto that deck. I have to use something like that in that instance to get the water to go down. But we're pulling lab samples as soon as harvest is over with, because something is way out of balance if you can't get water to go down. Survival and distribution is the different zones. I just had a gentleman out there in California that called me, and he said, hey, I want to know if you guys can do sampling for me. I said, absolutely. He said, I want to do 6 inches, I want to do 12 inches, and I want to do 3 foot. I said, why would you want to do that? Because that's what the guy told me to do. I said, do you know where the dinner plate is for the plant? And he said, no, I don't. It's the top 6 to 8 inches of the soil that's going to feed those plants. Has anybody ever put any kind of fertilizer on top, had it go through the profile, and magically come back up? Doesn't happen like that. The only thing that I know goes down and comes back up is sodium. In our area, some of the areas that we have, looks like it's snowed on top of the surface. That's how thick the alkali has become on top of the soil. By the way, when that guy got his soil report back, he sent me the soil report to read. He used a different lab and he sent it back to me. And here was a funny thing on the soil report. And again, his CECs on all these 5 ranches were all different. And across that, every single page that he sent me, the first dumb thing was a recommendation was written on the top, 6 inches. And the second dumb one was in October, they're telling him to put 200 units of nitrogen on every tree that needs to go to bed. So let me put it this way. If I gave you a pot of coffee at 11 o'clock at night and said, go to sleep, those trees have to have so many down hours of off production. And once they go into that, we don't put nitrogen until we get back to the spring. And on that 200 units, how much is actually getting to that plant since it's shutting down and it's evaporating into the atmosphere? And he's wondering why he's going broke putting on supplements into the soil, because you're not using some common sense. Just went over that, 6 to 8. SAR, there's some areas here. Sodium absorption rate, there's some things that I'll break out and show you guys that you ought to pay attention to when we start looking at water. And if you had your own water report, trust me, circle it, come back and we can talk about it. Adding gypsum to irrigation water, soil applied gypsum works about 3 irrigation cycles. Then it's leached out of the soil. So Kurt and I were talking about it last night, is we own a gypsum mine. We bring it in by 110 rail cars at a time into different locations all around the area. I go out and I spread that, and that works fantastic. And it's the biggest bulk of the gypsum that I put out. And why am I putting gypsum out in the first place? I'm putting it out because it's calcium based. And the purest form of gypsum that we have is only 24% calcium. And guys are saying, oh, I'm going to put a 2-ton out, but they don't realize that's 24%. So did they leave themselves short on what they were actually applying? Because they don't know what the numbers are. And I get the same thing. I can buy gypsum for $55 versus your $80 a ton. Have you ever looked at the percentages and the numbers? So out of that 45% JIP, what's the other? Just raising the elevation of your property? Because what's the other 45% inside that JIP? You don't know, I don't know. The lab doesn't even know. But it's cheap, and that's what they hear. They hear cheap, but they don't look at the quality of what it actually is. And I'll say this. I wished I was back here because you guys are painting a new palette and a new frontier on fertigation that we've been doing for quite some time. We have very little flood systems left because we had to conserve water. So for conserving water and making sure it hits the target zone is going through drip, and we do everything we can possibly do through fertigation of that. It's spoon-fed as I need it. As I turn on the irrigation, it's spoon-fed. I don't have traffic and I don't have compaction by running a tractor up and down, spreading, doing whatever. I'm able to fertigate, so I can put just about any nutrient I want to, as long as it's in a soluble form, into the field through my fertigation. It's one of the best tools you'll have. High performance water, without an adequate supply of high quality irrigation water, your crops can never achieve potential both in quality and yields. This was strange to me, is some of your best irrigation, some of your best wells are 200, 250 gallon, 500 gallon, and I treat those all day long, but we have systems doing 6,000 gallons a minute. And when you're doing 6,000 gallons a minute, you're laying down some serious water, serious bicarbonate, some serious poison into your soil. So these are some of the numbers that I like to see when I look at a water report. You guys would probably go immediately to a pH. I immediately go to looking at these things. What is my EC? I want it at 0.5 to 1.5. My bicarbonate, I see on reports out here that you guys are acceptable at 300 parts per million. That's ludicrous. Absolutely crazy. By that time, you are already upside down and harder to correct. It's at 120 is the benchmark. When I hit 120, I better be acidifying the water. If I wait till 300, I'm locked up, tied up, and it's going to be a hard thing to fix and break. Calcium, I want it less than 100 parts per million. I do see some calcium out here that's high. Mag in the water, I see it is high out here. Sodium is absolutely off the chart. 70 parts per million, and I see some stuff that's crazy. Fluoride, less than 70, and boron at 5. I had a gentleman that called me up that said, hey, I got a bad problem with boron in the water. What can you do to fix it? I don't know. He said, but I also have high bicarbonate water, and I have high sodium water. It was in a vineyard. I went up there, and I was pretty impressed when I drove up on the vineyard, and I see this guy's got a cover crop. I'm like, in between the vines, that's awesome. And in between the vines, he's got sheep out there. And the sheep are going to town on the cover crop. And in the cover crop, the guy's got a whole bunch of mustard planted in the cover crop. And the sheep are going to town on the mustard. And I said, that's awesome. We just have one problem. He looks at me and said, what's that, Greg? I said, if the sheep are eating it and they're discreting it, don't we still have the same problem? He said, man, don't tell me that. So we literally picked up some cheap stuff and we sent it to the lab, and when it came back, guess what? Smoking high, and he's thinking it's fertilizer, it's putting right back on what he just took off. He said, well, that's crazy, man, because the sheep love it. And I said, you got an open field over there. Harvest it, take it off the vineyard, because it did, that mustard worked just like a sponge on boron. Take it across a street and let the sheep go to town on it. That's common sense, but okay. This is what I look for when I look at a water report immediately in these numbers. Water is seldom perfect. Knowing the impact water is having on your soils, understand the damage bicarbonate and sodium is doing to your fields. Work with a knowledgeable soil and water professional in a reputable lab. People ask me, how often should you test the water? If I have surface water coming in, which we do in California this past year, we actually finally got some water coming down the canals. That water is typically going to be low EC water with probably not much in bicarbonate. I may have to inject calcium into that water to do what we call dirtying it up. because if I don't, it's going to strip the calcium out in the soil. And I also know if I turn the pump on in that same season, I need to know what the water's doing in there, because you got two vastly different systems going on at one time, and I need to know what both of them are doing. California, we have a lot of issues where we've gone to a lot of reservoirs like you guys have ponds out here. We've done a lot of that. We used to do a lot of wells, but now our wells are falling off. So we might have one well that does 250, another one that does 700, another one that does 1800, and another one that does 2500, all going into one reservoir. I want to know what each one of those wells are doing and adding to that overall collection of water, because if I can run that one that has the high bicarbonate for a very brief point of time, I want to use that water as less as I can and try to do the blending of the water, and then I also stick the sulfur burner into that reservoir, lower that pH, so when it goes through my system, I've already fixed and acidified that water. So that's one way that we do it there. You can move me on to the next one. I hope this next slide isn't one of your farms. Let me just do this. Guess where the pivot goes? Guess what's outside the pivot? Guess why there's greener on the outside of the pivot than inside the pivot? Not a nutrient problem in the soil. Remember the tree when I said there was no grass below it and it was burning it to the ground? That's exactly what this water is doing to this grower, and he's being robbed. Somebody's probably selling him more nitrogen. I say that jokingly, but it's not funny, because that's exactly what guys get out there. But it's a pretty good indicator if you're not using the irrigation water and you're getting better outside the pivot than you are inside, there's a problem. Here's the report. That's that. Here's a report that supports that. The first thing, and I don't know if you guys can see it very well, pH of 7.9, pop the hood. We got a problem. The next thing I go down to is I go to sodium. And by the way, this lab is incorrect. Such people can be incorrect in labs, because all they did was they take the parts per million times 2, and what was the real factor? 2.72. So that's wrong. So it's worse than they thought it was. And again, what did I say? At sodium needs to be below 70. We're at 300. We have a problem. Calcium, I have 153. Calcium's not a bad problem if I have it corrected. It works for me. If I don't have it corrected, it works against me. The first thing that'll happen if you have high bicarbonate water, it's going to grab a hold of calcium, and that's what you're seeing on the emitters is a calcium buildup on the emitters, and it turns into a rock. The next thing that I have an issue with is you see the hardness really not something. When you get over here to bicarbonate at 610, and again, they use the wrong factor on that. 120 is a factor where I need to start acidifying that water. There is a lot of stuff going on inside of this, and that water is not helping the grower. That water is hurting the grower, and the results, you saw what the results are. I would love to take this water and test it and do some stuff with it myself. And here's another thing. If you guys happen to run, in fact, we found one of these last night. Kurt and I were talking. If you look at the cation and the anion, those numbers ought to be relatively close to show you that you had a balance and a good report on the soil. I think we had one last night that was 19 and 30 or something like that. So automatically something went wrong in that water sample that should be a flashing indicator something's up. I'm going to get into now what we do with a soil sample is we use heavy acids and we use deionized water or distilled water to do the extractions out of the soil. Who in this room farms with deionized water? Why would we test a soil like that? Why would we use that, not use your irrigation water? Because isn't that rubber meets the road? Using your water, your soil to do that. And the way we do that is we do that with a paste saturation or a saturated paste. And what they do is they take your soil, and they get a cup, and they dump the water in there, and they mix it until they make a paste. And literally, they'll take a popsicle stick and mix it and put enough water in there that it will finally drip slowly off of the popsicle stick, and then they park that water for 48 hours, and then they take a vacuum and vacuum the water off of that soil sample. That is how you actually farm. Exactly how you farm. And don't you think that's going to give you better results that you understand? And I'm going to show you the difference that you get. So this is a gentleman that you can see up here in the top corner, 7.9. And again, that tells me something's off. Again, I need to pop the hood and figure out what's going on in the soil. And where I go immediately is right here. And you heard the gentleman say it earlier in the program. The numbers are generated off of here. This is the hub. These are the spokes. And this is exactly how you tell something's going on. So the 71 should be around 65% of what his cation. By the way, I can tell you what your soil is without stepping on your property by looking at the cation exchange. If I see a 10, 6, tells me you got a sand. If you go into 30s, you got clay. If you're 15, you got perfect soil. You got a sandy loam soil that everybody would love to farm on. Sandy is hard. Sandy will go out of balance fast, and you have to spoon feed it. Clay takes longer to go out of balance, but it takes longer to bring it back into balance. So here, that number should be 65. 19 means I'm too high in magnesium. My cation balance is out. His potassium level here is 4%. I'd like to see that between 5 and 6. He's growing oranges. This is a citrus block. I know you guys don't farm it, but it'll show you something. Sodium, he's only at 0.79. I don't want to see sodium above 2. Remember that number. This is his water analysis, and when I get it, some of the things that I start looking at, there's the hood again. His conductivity is right where I want it to be. His sodium absorption rate is only 1.73. If it's over 5, then I have a problem. I go down to sodium, he's under 70. Good. Bicarbonate, okay, he's at 167. We need to start acidifying the water at 120. And chloride, I don't want this above 70. But overall, I'd look at this water and I'd say, okay, if we just acidify this water, we'll probably be on the right track and we'll be okay. Here is a pH saturation test. Now I've taken his water, his soil, and combined the two, 8.2. Remember, we started having that reaction at 7.2 by the time we got to 7, and when we get to 8.3, everything shuts down. Everything. So you could throw good money after bad money. You're not, keep throwing nitrogen at it all day long. Not going to get the reaction. You're not going to get the growth. You're not going to get the production that you want. Remember, it was 167 in the water. That's lethal. Bad. Here's the really bad thing. Again, we wanted calcium at 65%. We wanted magnesium at 15. We wanted potassium at 5. And what did we want sodium at? 2. Do we have a problem? We absolutely have a problem, and here's the results of the problem. That top orange was taken out of a field next to him, irrigated on a different system. So what happens is you can see the sizing is already changing, and that navel that's up there. So what's happening here is it's starting to split out because it's starting to puke it out and it can't support it, and it starts aborting the fruit. And the guy's wondering, he's had 8 guys go out and look at this, and everybody tells him he's deficient on nitrogen. He's deficient in calcium. They're right. But if you looked at his soil and water report, did you happen to see that? No, he was good on his nutrients, were good in the soil and water, so he never saw it. Because you don't farm with that kind of water. Doing a soil report, you farm with your own irrigation water, and when you do the two combined in a pH saturation, that's what's different. This is what his production looks like. That's the bottom of the navel, and you can see how thin this area is around it. This is the top. You can see the difference in the rind being on top, and that's if it survives. Here's what really happens. It's out and it aborts. There's his dollars. And guys are telling him a completely different story based off of what he's seeing in water and soil sampling. PH saturation make a difference? You have to know. You have to know what your own irrigation water is doing for you, because everything that you're doing can be working absolutely against you. Now we know what's going on. Now we can attack it. We can go after it, and we can change things, and we can get him back in line. But again, when I get him back in line, I'm not going to trust the standalone water and soil report. I'm going back after a pH saturation, see if we made changes in that. Any questions? I'm telling you guys, the water reports that I get out here are horrendous. The blessing that you guys actually have is that you have a lot of annual rainfall. But if you have to rely on any type of irrigation, and the gentleman, I asked him a while ago, so he has done exactly, he was like my poster child for exactly what I'm saying. And I asked him a while ago, I said, how come you guys can't grow high dollar crops? He said, funny you ask, because that's exactly what we've been discussing. We probably may, and this, again, I'm not trying to be a smartass in California, but we probably make $5,000 an acre off of what we're growing, because this stuff is important. And we couldn't grow soybean or corn either. The only guys that grow corn is silage guys in California. But we couldn't even grow that crop if we didn't do anything to correct the water. Yes, sir. So we're acidifying that. We're using acids to burn that bicarbonate off. That bicarbonate is exactly the same thing as like that vinegar. We go into your main line. We go into your main line and we inject it directly into the main line. And by the time, we know, we titrate the water to say based on how many gallons and what your bicarbonate levels are. That's the two things we have to know. We titrate the water, we get water, we drop a acid in it, check the pH. Okay, we're not low enough. Drop another. We test the pH until we get enough drops to get it at 6.5. Those drops convert into how many gallons or ounces that need to be injected into that water to get that water at a 6.5. Or we also do sulfur burners, where we have the sulfur burner sitting in a pond, a reservoir. It's automatic. And so what it does is we set points. The set point might be, when the water goes above 6.7 in the reservoir, it automatically kicks on. And then we have it set at set points. If we wanted to be at 6.0, that reservoir is at 6.0, it shuts itself off. You got new water come in, it goes above 6.8, turns back on, and it gets all the water in that reservoir. Now we can pull that water right out of that reservoir and run it right through the irrigation line, that corrected water. And again, you can use, if you do infuric. So the old ways, one of the older gentlemen came to some of the meetings I used to hold at the beginning. They used to do sulfuric acid in a battery box that dripped into a canal. And they would put a D8 out there with a stinger on it and pick the water up and move it. Because they didn't titrate the water, they just had that battery box with it leaking. They'd move the D8 and the stinger would stay behind. Because the water became so corrosive, not titrating it, that they may have the water down to a -2. Or they'd have it down so low that it was eating the steel up on that stinger, and they'd drive off and leave the stinger in the canal. Now we have the system where it looks at the water as it's coming in, it tests what that pH is, it titrates and puts enough acid into that water, and it tests it on this end. If there's any deviation, it goes back and forth and adds more drops, less drops, more drops, less drops, and keeps it at a constant 6.5. The other thing, you have to be injecting, if you have high sodium problems, you have to be injecting gypsum into the water, because the gypsum is going to grab a hold of the sodium and it's going to pull it out of the system. And even though I did that in broadcast and I spread it out on the field, I put gypsum out in the field. I've done the 3 or 4 irrigations. I've stripped that gypsum out. I need to keep adding more to catch that sodium coming in from that water. It's going to go in the field, but now it's got bound together with this calcium, and it's going to pull it through the soil profile. It's not an easy fix, but the longer you let it build up, the harder it's going to be to fix it. And I see that when I see acceptable levels saying that your bicarbonate 300 is acceptable, I cringe. Because that guy is going to suffer every time you move one. So if you went from a 5.5 to a 6.5, that's 10 times harder to fix for every point you go up. That just means instead of a couple ounces, I'm doing a couple gallons of that. So, any other questions? Thank you guys, appreciate it. And guys want water sampling. I think they brought some sample bottles in today, and pick those up, get the water tested, see how much damage it's doing to you, because it doesn't matter what you're doing in the dirt if you're not paying attention. Appreciate your time. Thank you. Yes, sir. I am a Brookside consultant, and I went with Brookside because has anybody in here heard of Dr. Albrecht? So I followed Dr. Albrecht, and Dr. Albrecht started Brookside Lab out of Ohio. And people say, why are you in California? You're sending your stuff to Ohio. Because I don't want the guys telling me in California that I need to add 200 units of nitrogen. They're trying to make the recommendations as a grower, and they're actually working hand in hand with nutrients selling products for them. I just want the analytical facts. Give me the facts. Let us work with the growers. Let us write the prescriptions without having any bias. If you don't believe what I said, this is one of the best books you can get in your soil. It's Dr. Albrecht's Theory, and it's fantastic. Dr. Albrecht's Balancing Soil, Dirt to Soil. I read Microbes. Funny, we both have the same book. I was reading it on the plane, and he's got it in his back pocket. Microbes are the next step in fixing some of the problems. Thank you. Appreciate your time.